Welcome, everyone, to our webinar series, Decipher the Dating Code, Solving the Mystery of Dating and Relationship in the 21st Century. My name is Dr. Dan Emzalag, and I'm your moderator for today's workshop. So here is a quick bit about myself. I'm a cognitive behavior psychotherapist and marriage and relationship coach, passionate about helping people build healthy and long-lasting relationships. Now, these workshop series explore the many challenges of modern dating, from online interaction and communication struggles to emotional availability and genuine connection. Now, our goal here is to help you navigate today's complex dating scene with clarity, confidence, and purpose. So joining me today at this workshop is our expert panelist, Dr. Iniri Gouzos, a clinical psychologist with advanced training in human sexuality, and will bring to this workshop her deep expertise in the intersection of psychological wellness, intimacy, and human relationship. So before we begin the workshop, I will invite our guest panelist to briefly introduce herself, as no one else can do a better job. Dr. Gouzos, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dan, for having me. You can call me Rainy. I have my degree in clinical psychology, and then I also have a master's in education for human sexuality. And for the past 10 years or so, I've been exclusively working in private practice with a lot of clients focusing on relationship and sexuality issues. So I do see a lot of individuals and a lot of couples in my work as well.
Beautiful. Well, it is such a pleasure to have you here today, Irini, attending this workshop, and we look forward to jumping today's topic.
Yeah.
So first and foremost, let me get started with a real life scenarios that probably have happened to all of us related to the psychology of sexual attraction. So picture this. Let's say you're sitting in a crowded cafe. Across the room, two strangers lock eyes. No words, just a glance, and suddenly there's tension, curiosity, and possibility. Now that spark, that is not random. That's psychology and biology teaming up. Now we all live in a culture that turns attraction into instant gratification. We swipe, match, meet, gone by the next morning, and followed by ghosting. Now, so what used to be a mystery is now a momentum. And social media is not helping. It's like a spotlight on our deepest cravings: attention, validation, those likes, desire, amplifying what pulls us in and what keeps us chasing for more. But underneath all of this, something ancient is at work. Your brain is firing signals, releasing chemicals, reading subtle cues: symmetry, voice tone, confidence, etc. Now, science called this chemistry, but this feels like magic, especially when it happens at that given moment with you and the other person. And that magnetic pull isn't just physical, it's emotional, psychological, even evolutionary. So now that we're going to just jump a little bit further into how can we decipher what is psychological and biological? And are we really truly understanding what attracts us beyond physicality? So let's jump directly into the topic that we discussed, you and I, Irini. And so if you could explain to us the psychology of sexual attraction. And a lot of people have difficulty in understanding the difference between lust, love,
hmm
connection, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the simplest way to put this is that for attraction in general, there are three layers to it. The one is sort of like the physical, the sensory part that you're talking about. What would someone deem more as lust? The deeper and across, like directly from this, is the emotional, relational a layer of this. This is what we would like usually term love. And then there's like the cognitive and intellectual layer. And this would be something that you could think of as like the getting to know each other phase or the building the relationship phase. And it's based on shared values, figuring out the worldview together, exploring all these different other parts of your life that don't necessarily have to do with sexual attraction, like sex, or like romantic feelings, like love, but more like building a common life together.
But then when we look at the honeymoon stage and a couple, and what really drives us together, what drives a connection is the physicality, is the sexual attraction. But
hmm
then it depends on how you cultivate this attraction, how
Exactly.
it lasts in a relationship before it diminishes and the reality of this relationship comes out. So, and I know it's hard to be able to determine how long it will take before this happens, but in average, when does love kicks in?
So, in average, people usually, research has shown us at any time between 1 year to about 3 years is when like all of like the lust of it is sort of like taking a secondary step and like the love starts forming. And this isn't like a hard rule. Like sometimes this can happen a little bit earlier, but when you first start seeing someone for the first like 6 to 9 months, you have what's called like new relationship energy a lot of the times. You're getting to know someone, you're doing a lot of things together that are very novel, that are new. Because even if they are things that you've done with another person, they're not things that you've done with this person. So that creates a lot of kind of the bonding excitatory hormones like oxytocin
Mhm.
in our body and a lot of like dopamine. So like it primes our brain to be stimulated, which causes a lot of like that intensity that we feel when we first start to know someone. As our body becomes then situated to that and becomes somewhat used, then is when we start coming up with sort of like the growing pains in relationship. And that's when again like you kind of like get into that phase that you're talking about of you're starting to build the relationship, you're potentially starting to have romantic feelings for this person, and you're starting to maybe consider what is this going to look like more long term, and potentially, either building a life together or having this person in your life for a much longer time than just the dating part.
Mhm. But then here's the big problem, Dr. Eden, is that we see that we live now compared to the
Mm-hmm.
1970s or 80s in a hookup culture. Now it's more focused into instant gratification. So
Mm-hmm.
it's still looking for that high of the moment where you have more lust than love, because once the attraction kind of diminishes a little bit in the relationship because you're
Mm-hmm.
discussing with them,
Yes,
no longer have that drive, that oxytocin, that dopamine,
exactly.
serotonin, and all that is being produced of the hormones in the brain. So how do we keep this momentum continuing instead of saying, "Ah, well, I got my dosage. Now it's up to the next one."
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think a lot of times it's very like unconscious, right? And you're like not sure of like what happens when you start shifting and feeling less excitement. But because some of the things that you mentioned is sort of like the instant gratification of our culture today, as well as how fast we can move on. Like for example, like if you go to Instagram now, like you are pushed a lot of reels, like a lot of short-term content. So it makes you want to move from one thing to the next really, really fast.
Correct.
You don't have to wait. And it's the same thing like with the invention of dating apps. While it has helped a lot of people like find more long-term relationships, it does give this illusion of immediate availability of other resources where you can get that instant hint. So somebody is not necessarily aware that like, oh, like I'm losing this sense of excitement. It's more like, well, this doesn't feel as good as it was, but I know how I can feel again good by going and seeking all these other resources that are readily available for me in this moment.
But then when it comes to the communication skills, that we no longer
Hmm.
know how to communicate with the other person, because if we feel that there's a problem in the sexual attraction, we automatically think that there's no more connection with that other person, because
Hmm.
we base ourselves primarily on the physicality aspect. So does that does it mean that eventually people completely lose ways in communicating?
So it can mean a lot of things. It can mean that a lot of people like will lose the communication aspect. That's why you have a lot of things like ghosting or people like not being honest about it, right? Like you go on a first date, you feel things were okay, you're curious about the other person, but maybe you didn't feel like that immediate spark. So you just like say like, okay, like let's keep in touch. We'll talk about planning, right? And then you never hear back from the other person. So like there is like a lack of communication skills that is sort of like being implemented in this. This is also happening in dating apps because it's not just like after a first contact or meeting with someone on a dating, like for an actual date, but it's also like with all the messages that you can send potential, partners or potential love interests. You can just send a hi and a hello and then move on. So you don't ever get into a phase where you're actually doing the middle part of the attraction, right? Like you're not getting into the cognitive intellectual unless you are very intentional in pursuing that yourself and have set some boundaries around your own behavior for that.
So true. But then when we look at the human biology, and when it comes to men,
Hmm.
for men to be able to express their attraction, they use sex for to do that. But for a woman to be able to give her body,
Hmm.
she has to be emotional connected to the men. So
Mm-hmm.
this distinction, and eventually they do not know how to be able to express it the best way possible, then this is where there's a breakage in
Yes.
either continuing the relationship or figuring out exactly what the other person wants. If
Mm-hmm.
you know how to communicate because of past relationship trauma, that can cause more problem in the existing relationship. So how do we overcome this?
Mm-hmm. So from what we know from research is that the differences biologically with like the different like sexual genders is not that big. What makes a really big difference is actually the socialization piece. So men are not necessarily taught to communicate or express deeper feelings because it's just not something that is done in our society in a way that's not looked down upon. Like imagine like messages that we give to like little boys like, "Oh, come on, like pick up, like don't cry, it's gonna be fine." Like, right? Like you're teaching men at a young age to not be emotionally expressive because they're supposed to be like tough and masculine. And for women, like a big way of teaching them is like, oh, you're like more emotional, you should be more, rational, etc. All these messages about how they should behave. So they learn at a young age that you have to kind of keep yourself together and communicate in a way because that's what's gonna get you heard. Um, but again, like I think a lot of these things can be very much an individual journey for people, which can cause a lot of loneliness because if you don't have these skills, then you're not going to be successful in dating.
Mhm.
But then you can't find someone that's going to be patient enough to teach you those skills. So there has to be some kind of internal curiosity about your own self and where you're coming from and what maybe is your part of creating some difficulty in your own struggles as well.
Mhm. But do you think that also stems from generational trauma or childhood
Mm-hmm.
trauma where when girls are being raised as they're being young, the parents always say, hey, you're a princess, never settle for
Mm-hmm.
anything, always go for the best, etc. And then for
Mm-hmm.
boys, when they're being raised, they always say, treat women like a princess, like a queen,
Mm-hmm.
and all of that. So now we see that the women are wearing the pants in the family and the guys are acting like women. So do you
Mm-hmm.
feel this is starting to change completely the way that the role of a man and a woman in a relationship?
I think again, like it can be really cultural. There are a lot of cultures where you still have very much like that macho, and I see a lot of couples from a lot of different cultures, and there are many cultures that still value that sort of like macho, like independence and machismo in men, which makes them sort of like they have to be the breadwinner in the family, which can cause a lot of problems because actually like a lot more women
Mhm.
are more the breadwinners in their family now. So
Correct.
then you get a lot of sort of like kind of the difference between the what society tells you it should be, what you feel like it should be, and what actually is,
Mhm.
which causes a lot of the struggles in the relationship growth as well. And again, like this goes back to something you were talking about earlier, which is like the breakdown in the communication, right? Because if you're thinking in your head, well, I'm the man, I should be the one that is the provider, but now I'm dating someone who is actually making more money than me and has their life together, but I really like them, but that doesn't fit my idea of what the relationship is. There's no language, no way for you to express it to them or figure out how to move forward from that if you think that this person is a worthwhile, partner at some point.
But if they both agree on each other's role in the family, isn't that not going to be a problem anymore? Because then if the woman say, look, if we have to think about having kids and the cost of babysitters and all that is
Mm-hmm.
rocketing now, it's better now that you just stay with the kids and I'll be able to bring the two, three, $400,000.
Mm-hmm.
So if they agree upon that in the beginning, do you think that eventually the woman will lose respect towards her husband because he's not taking the role of a provider?
Mm. I think again, like it would really depend on how they're, because one of the things to keep in mind is that our internalized scripts and the way that we ascribe our behavior and our values is not always immediately clear to us. So even though we agree to something in the beginning, it doesn't mean that's always going to be the case as a relationship or a life progresses. And I think a lot of times what ends up happening is that you get into power struggles in situations where one goes against the other. And that's where you can build a lot of resentment. And then that causes a lot more breakdown in communication as well from that.
Okay, and so if we go back to the lust versus love,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know this is like more the psychology of sexuality. When it comes to now we see after having kids, women are less likely to be feeling sexy enough to be able to
Mm-hmm.
be intimate with their significant other. So the man feels rejected and so on and so forth. So
Mm-hmm.
is there a way for people to be able to communicate and say this versus
Mm-hmm.
accepting that, hey, you know what, I no longer want to have sex, and you have to accept it because come to think of it, it is the woman who decide the
Mm-hmm.
sex life of a couple. Come to think of it.
Mm-hmm.
So how do what can a man do at this point if he's still attracted to his wife despite how the wife sees herself?
Mm-hmm. So I think a way to also sort of change this a little bit is that you need to consider that the sexual life you're building with a partner is a component of both of your sexualities. And there has to be communication around that. We know that there's a lot of different like desire cycles, and then we know that there's also a lot of different desire levels as well. And what we know for sure is that in relationships, at some point, there will be desire discrepancies between two partners, whether one partner is going to want more sex, whether the other one's going to want less sex. The point is not that the one partner gets 100% what they want. The point is that you figure out where you're at on the spectrum, and then you find a middle ground where maybe you're not going to get 100% what you want, but both of you are getting something like 75% of what you want. And the thing with this is that, again, like this is not something that's going to be stable throughout your life, because we know that sexuality gets affected by a lot of things, including outside pressures and outside stressors, as well as our just body's natural, ways of growing. And sometimes it means like when you're growing older, you're maybe not as sexual, or if you are going through specific like physical struggles or just normal changes, that's going to affect your sexuality in any kind of way.
Mhm.
So again, like it goes back to that sort of like pivotal thing that you said in the beginning, which is that communication is so important. And something that tends to be really helpful for couples is being open and having these conversations early on in the dating life, because you're building a base there to have and extrapolate from later on in your life together. When you're open and you're talking about these things, you can constantly find a solution because you have that openness. If you start keeping these things inside and you're not sharing about them with your partner, but you're just thinking them, then you're kind of building a narrative in your head that causes to become more of a maze, and you don't have a solution in that because you're just constantly trapped into the narrative that you have. You don't have any ways to check against the narrative. So the communication piece, again, very, very important.
Yeah, but then again, Irini, if let's say we look at in the dating scene where two people talk and a woman will never
Mhm.
say, hey, by the way, I'm asexual. I hate sex,
Mhm.
I cannot stand sex. Chances are she's going to be single for the rest of her life. So women will have the tendency to be able to draw in the men to say, yeah, I love to be intimate 3, 4, 5 times a week. That's my dream,
Mhm.
blah, 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 whatever it is. Then the guy is being misled. And once a marriage comes in or once they sign their
Mhm.
signature in the dotted line, then suddenly, oh, you know what? They come up with excuses after excuses after excuses to not
Mhm.
be intimate. So basically, this person has been misled.
Mhm. I think that's something that we can't really do a lot about, right? Because again, if are you intentionally misleading someone, or are you misleading someone because you're misleading yourself? And that's only a question like that you as an individual can speak to about where you're coming from and what you are. That's why a lot of times it is super important, again, to be clear on what you are hoping to get out of something. Are you hoping to, date someone because you really like them for what they have to offer you? Are you wanting to date someone because you like the way they look? Are you dating someone because you like the way they make you feel? Or are you dating someone with more intention, right? Like trying to build something together and knowing that at any given time, both of you are not going to be 100% perfect, but you can work towards, again, like that middle ground.
That's so true. Now, I've read a lot of articles related to
Hmm.
psychology of sexuality. I hear a lot of like different distinction between sexual magnetism and sexual attraction, and they
Hmm.
differently. So does that mean that there is actually a distinction between both?
I think a lot of this can be very much up to the individual. I think some like what you're referring to is sort of like the differentiation between magnetism, like of immediately feeling that lust for someone versus something that builds a little bit slower. Is that what
Correct.
you're referring? Okay. So again, like it could be different, but sometimes it could be the same. As I was saying earlier, we know that there are a lot of different types of desire, and desire shows up in a lot of different ways for people. And one of those ways, also means that what I find attractive is probably very different than what you find attractive. And depending on how I'm meeting someone and I'm seeing them, what I find attractive can be very, very apparent at first, which then would lead to that sense of like, that instant lust, like that magnetization that you're talking about, versus like if I'm slowly meeting someone and I start getting interested in them, then the lust builds from there. And it is because maybe the things that attract me are just not immediately apparent on someone.
But does it mean that if something comes quickly, like sexual magnetism, does it mean that it's going to crash quickly?
Not necessarily. Again, like I think once you have that initial attraction towards someone, that can lessen in intensity, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to go away unless something else comes in that becomes more of a problem. That might be something like you've heard like a lot of people talk about as like a turnoff or a red flag or the ick, right? If you start perceiving things that are things that you don't like, then yes, like the intensity of attraction is going to go down.
So now we see a lot of those different terms online about in the past we used to call it friends with benefits. Now we call it situationship. And now the like, term that they use online. So does it mean that in a situationship, it means that two people don't want to put a stamp on that actual relationship and
Hmm.
are seeing each other without saying that they have a boyfriend, girlfriend? I'm trying to understand the dynamic of that term.
Oh, the situationship.
Yeah.
I think it really is defined. Like a lot of like clients that I've had that have been in situationships have sort of it's a little bit of a double-edged sword in some way because most of the times my clients have wanted more, but the other person has not wanted more. So they have just been settling with getting the attention because that's what they could get. And on the other side, when I've had clients who have been in situations because they didn't feel ready to be in a relationship, there was a lot of past history with like past relationship trauma or a lot of like difficulties with insight, self-esteem and not knowing what they would be like as a partner. And sometimes it purely is situational that people just don't have what they need to be capable to be fully present to build a relationship at that time. And again, it could be things like they're working too much or they just don't have time or there's just like other general stressors that have to do with, like family, friends, etc.
Hmm. But do you think also it can stem from having bad relationship before or toxic relationships, so they're afraid of falling in the same pattern,
Hmm.
same routine, so they want to be able to keep it as, I would say, superficial as possible?
Absolutely, because something that we know for sure is that when we lean into the lust and when we lean into the hookup culture somewhat, right? Like the situationships, the one night stands, that sometimes we can always talk about it all the time, but we know that it is a way to remain safe and not go into something that would create vulnerability with someone that could potentially hurt you a lot.
Mhm. So how can we block our feelings, Irini? How can we, I mean, depending on when you are with someone that you feel still doubtful, does that
Hmm.
mean that you have to listen to your inner voice to say, don't open your heart and just
Hmm.
as casual as you possibly can?
Yeah. I think a big part of that is, again, like you have to be curious with yourself first, right? Why is this feeling so scary for me? Why is the idea of being vulnerable with someone creating such a strong internal fear reaction? And a lot of times people can get two answers on their own, and other times they may need to go to therapy or they may need to talk it out with friends to figure out what's really happening. But again, like the big shift and the big way that this will change is if you are the initiator in that change yourself.
Mhm.
Because nothing, if you meet the perfect person for you and they are the most beautiful, gracious, charismatic person, and you are so attracted to them and you can see, your life together, but you still choose not to get into that relationship. There's nothing that person can do to get you to be in a relationship. It has to come from you. So you are the catalyst for changing your life, regardless of where you're at.
But then again, also the action of the other person may bring certain triggers or certain past memories that the other person who's suffering or who's holding in their emotion, they may remember, oh, he acted the same as my ex. So that
Mm-hmm.
is how the outcome of the relationship may be. So do you think that by her communicating and saying, you know what, your past behavior reminded me of a very toxic
Mm-hmm.
relationship that caused me to stay away from potentially building something new or building something strong? Do you think that this may just kind of open up the can of worm?
I don't think it would open up a can of worms. I think it would open up more communication for the relationship because ultimately you want to be able to get to the point where you are communicating some of those past experiences, not because of, you're equating this person with your past partner, but telling them like, this is something that hurt me. This is like a wound for me. And I'm feeling it being really gentle right now. And it's kind of aching. And I'm not sure why this is happening.
Mhm.
But saying that to the other person is what actually builds intimacy and what's getting you into what we call like an emotional attunement, right? Intimacy, like into me, you see, I'm letting you in my own world so that you can know what works for me. And similarly, when the other person does that for you and they let you into their own world and you see them for who they are, that's what also brings the safety and the vulnerability and above all else builds the trust.
Correct. And also is the tone that you express yourself, because if the other person feels it as a threat or if they see it as an attack, they're going to say, hey, I'm not the other guy. Why are you blaming
Hmm.
being what the
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I think again, like this is where often like you when I see couples, this is where there's some disconnect, is that people don't know how to hear sometimes someone being more emotionally vulnerable because they can be scary for them as well because you don't know what to say. And oftentimes you can feel defensive, right? So you might say, like, well, I'm not the other person. Like, I wouldn't do that to you. And other times you may try to find a solution, right? You may try to say like, oh my gosh, like I'm so sorry, like let me, next time I'm gonna do ABC, or I'm gonna make sure to never do this again, or blah blah blah, right? And what we know of, like, it's not so much about the problem solving, it's more about sitting with someone when they're having that emotion and letting them experience it for themselves and then gently move on from that. And there can be problem solving after that. But if we bypass the emotion connection part, then we are not creating that safety, that vulnerability. We're just focusing on short-term solutions.
Mhm. Now, in the dating scene, and I know we do have some a couple of women here in online that are listening to what we're saying. In the dating scene, we see a lot of people where they are afraid to express their either sexual attraction or sexual, I would say, hunger. Okay.
Mhm.
How long in, when they meet someone, how long after do they need to start talking about intimacy? What are you looking for in sexual attraction or sexual intimacy? Is there a time that we have to be able to
Mhm.
talk more, or do we just have to let happen on its own?
Mhm. I would say the earlier that it feels safe, the better. Obviously, you're meeting people online, you're not sure who they are. You have to take certain precautions for yourself. And this is true for men and women, or, however someone identifies. This is not going to change. But when you start feeling safe to maybe have some of those deeper conversations around like sexual preferences, you should have them early. Because again, like you're building like that communication, you're building that space to be able to grow together.
Okay. Um, we're just like we have maybe 10 minutes left here on this workshop. We have Rachel and Natasha on online. Do you have any question for either Irini or myself? And I know you guys been muted for a while, so if you want to be able to join in, please. This is the we want to have a good dynamic in this workshop. So anyone has any question, you could ask. You could unmute yourself as well because we could not hear you. No? Okay.
Hello. I don't have any questions. It's more of I've been working on like my dating patterns and I realized patterns about myself, things I let slide in relationships that ultimately end up being the demise of the relationship. So I'm trying to avoid that. So this is really good to like just do the research, talk to professionals before you get back out there again. So thank you for today's session.
Absolutely. Now, Natasha, do you feel that based on what was shared today versus what you used to do in the dating scene or when you start meeting people, was there any information in there that you would wish you would have known before you get back into the dating scene?
Yeah, the comments about really asking yourself why something makes you feel a certain way would have been helpful. I tended to like just jump into things and okay, let's see. Let's just keep going. Let's see what happens, but not taking that time beforehand to realize or question why you feel a certain way about certain things, and then give yourself permission to respond to why you feel that way. If there's a reason, it's okay to say, pause, this isn't for me. Maybe I shouldn't go see, maybe I shouldn't explore this further.
And have you kept a relationship longer than what it's supposed to be just because you thought that, maybe I should give it a chance, maybe I should not be that demanding or having a large checklist like most women have?
Yes, I have I've overlooked things trying to give people passes like, well, maybe they didn't mean it like that, or maybe they're having a bad day, or, you name it. Erring on the side of giving other people grace while not paying attention to my own feelings. So I'm planning on not doing that anymore.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so much for joining and sharing your own experience, Natasha. I mean, your feedback is definitely something that everyone has to hear, and we need to really have a true like level of experience of everyone and let us know exactly how we can advise our clients better. Because again, everyone have their own subjective experience in the dating scene. Some people just give up on those dating apps because it is horrible, and and I have seen many of them coming to me and telling me the same. And I'm sure that Dr. Irini has seen and I've heard most horror stories as well. But then at the same time, because of the technology advancement that we see, it's very hard to be able to meet people otherwise. And now
Hmm.
more and more people coming in and joining those meetup groups to be able to meet
Yeah.
face to face. But then again, it's a full-time job, Irini.
Yes. And I think like that is actually one of the most complaints that I hear from people who are trying to like find potential partners or even people to date for fun. It is really hard to just like find anyone on the apps, and no matter what apps you join, it just seems to have like the same people on it. So I think like some of the things that I try to tell my clients to maybe think a little bit outside of the box is think about an interest that you have. See if there's any meetup groups. See if there's any free activities going on in a city. There are, at given time, like a lot of free events going on. So you could try to go to some of those free events. I live in Boston, so there's always like a lot of free museum nights for adults, like after hours, monthly. So I have suggested those a lot of times. Like go to the museum, like grab your friends, go at the night, for the museum, look around, maybe you'll meet some people. And then also again, like a lot of like free events depending on the season as well. But the best ways is to look into things that you like and you're interested in, and then see if there are any meetup groups or in general any groups that you could join.
Mhm. And do you think that now, and this is the last topic that we're going to cover, do you think that social media have completely numbed our senses when it comes
Mm.
to what we feel is normal in relationship? Like when we see people kind of like posting online, this is my boyfriend, we've been going there, we've been going this and this and this. And then when the person reads this post and they don't do much with their significant other, they will go and complain to say, hey, look at her, she did this, boyfriend, all that, and we do nothing. What's the deal with this? And so that causes people to just create new arguments where they're not supposed to be there.
I think, comparison is ultimately the thief of joy. And a lot of social media is, a highlight reel. So that is something that I talk a lot about with clients as well. And rationally, a lot of my clients know this. Like they say it themselves to me when they complain about these things. Say like, I know that this isn't how it is, but it does make me feel still this way, right? So you have then the different parts of you. Like you have like the rational part, but you still have the emotional part that feels sort of like that comparison in a bad way. So something we'll talk about is, if there are things that are really upsetting, limiting your access to certain social media, or making sure that if you're catching yourself comparing, focus on what is really the comparison trying to tell you. Again, getting curious with yourself about your reaction. For example, like if you're seeing that someone went on a trip, right, with their partner and their partner, like surprised them with this trip, what about that experience seems so attractive to you that is bringing up like this feelings of inadequacy for your relationship? And once you ask that for yourself, it can give you a couple ideas of what maybe are things that you value that you feel like you're not getting into the relationship, which can again then open up more communication for you and your partner.
Absolutely. So before we conclude today's workshop, if you can please, Irini, share your contact information to the people who attended this workshop in case they want to be able to ask more question afterwards.
Absolutely. Do you want me to put it on the chat?
No, just say it out loud, like on the,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah. So you can reach out to me at my email. It's Dr Iniri Gouzos at gmail.com. And that's spelled DRIRINIGOUZOS at gmail.com. And
Beautiful.
thank you so much for your attendance today on a holiday weekend.
Yes, I know. I was expecting it because when we planned that last year, actually, Renee, I completely forgot that this was a
Yes.
and the holiday. So, but I'd like to thank you for taking the time out of your relaxing Memorial Holiday week to join us and engage with the valuable tips and advice shared today. And we also look forward to the upcoming workshop that we have throughout 2026, featuring new expert panelists and a wide range of engaging topics focused on dating and relationship. So I'd like to wish you all a wonderful rest of your Memorial weekend, and we look forward to connecting with you very soon. Signing.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.